Morning, everyone. It's 9. It doesn't have any audio. It's just for our cameras in the back, so we're good on that. It's 9, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. Some of you guys, I see some familiar faces. Some of you guys might know me, but if not, my name is Hannah, and I'm the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator, which sounds a little different than my role for the past 11 months, so I'm still getting used to it off my tongue. But so, if you all, I see some like returning faces as well for seminars. I will now be taking over from Marissa Blackburn, who was originally the education coordinator. She has since moved on from us. So we wish her the best of luck in her new role, but I will be taking over for the time being. So you guys will probably see my faces again and again. So I'm now gonna go through some past events that we've had. So Cape River Watch, we have attended many outreach events in the past couple weeks, including the Native Plant Festival at the Arboretum, which our 4-year intern, some of you guys may know, LJ, spoke at. Savannah, our new AmeriCorps Resilience Project Coordinator, she attended Alderman Elementary's Mad Science Night. Another intern, Olivia, has attended H.E. Armin's opening reception for her solo art show, My Electric Eye. You might see some quarter sheets up there on the table for it. It is her first solo art reception that she's having, and she's donating a portion of her proceeds to Cape River Watch. Lulu, Marilyn, and LJ also attended the Fem and STEM event at Fort Fisher Aquarium. And some of you guys may know Rob. He is the water quality. I'm already breaking things on my first time. Gosh. Okay. Where were we? Oh yes, Benevolent Fleet. It was at Waterline Brewing Company just over here, and Rob presented on plastic pollution. He also hosted a cleanup with Xylem and Greenfield Lake Watershed, and they were able to clean up 100 pounds of litter from Willard Pond. And then Rob also trained 2 new creek watchers. And then as far as upcoming news, Fire in the Pines is happening this afternoon at Halliburton Park. If you guys have a free afternoon and want to get out there, it's from 10 to 2. A couple of our interns will be out there, as well as some other amazing organizations. Our second Saturday cleanup will be in the Greenfield Lake Watershed, so go ahead and make sure to register on the website for that. This month's Saturday paddle will be on Town Creek. More information to come of that. As of right now, I don't have much information. Kemp is in Western North Carolina. He took some supplies out there until, I want to say he'll get back Monday. So that'll be in the next e-news information on the paddle if you guys are interested. And then lastly, our annual membership meeting will be on November 17th. So it's still like 6 weeks out, but just to let you guys know, get it on your calendar. We will also be taking donations for the pancakes and coffee in the back if you guys are able to contribute. I want to thank TK and CV for being here. They are doing the audio and the cameras. Thank you guys so much. And then I'm now going to turn it over. Where are you at? Oh, in the back. I'm now going to turn it over to this wonderful woman who's doing our daffodil fundraiser.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Lennon, and as most of you know, I've been peddling daffodils for Riverwatch for many, many years, but it's been about 4 years due to COVID. So people need to find out about it again, and I need all of your help. I would love it if some of you would take these little packets and maybe sell in your neighborhoods, or if you have a book group or a sewing group or any kind of a gathering that you could pass them out. You put your own name at the top, those little address labels that we all get in the mail and throw away. Put them on there, and then you collect them back, and I'll fill the orders and get them back to you. There's pictures up here of what the daffodils are. If you would like to turn an order in to me today, I would love it. But part of what we do is try to get more and more people involved with Riverwatch by having them plant these bulbs, but we put a little thing, a little blurb that tells about Riverwatch and says, please come join us. So we're spreading the word about Riverwatch as well as raising a little bit of money. So if you can help, I'll be here afterwards. Please come see me. Thanks.
Okay, you guys are going to hear from me one last time. I'm going to introduce the speakers now. So we have 3 wonderful speakers for today. Warren Darrell is an environmental science instructor with the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute and an active volunteer with the North Carolina Coastal Federation, the Coastal Estuarine Research Reserve, and the U.S. Coastal Guard. He has master's degrees in environmental engineering and environmental science. Our next speaker is Emily Mulvihill. She is the assistant executive director for Plastic Ocean Project. She grew up in rural central New York with a passion for nature and the environment. Emily earned her associate's degree in environmental studies from the Finger Lakes Community College. She then continued her education at Coastal Carolina University, obtaining her bachelor's degrees in marine science. As assistant executive director for POP, Emily manages the education and outreach program, coordinates volunteers, and organizes fundraising and cleanup events. One highlight from her time at POP included a research expedition this past April to Bermuda, collecting marine plastic samples in the North Atlantic. Emily's favorite part about her job is educating and empowering the next generation to create a more sustainable future. And then next we have Gabi. She is a UNCW marine biology alum with a deep passion for facilitating climate adaptation through community perspectives and values. In 2023, Gabi received a master's degree in natural resources, specializing in global sustainability, and has since become a certified floodplain manager and Chesapeake Bay landscape professional through her work at Wetlands Watch, an environmental nonprofit based in Norfolk. As the community engagement project manager, Gabi runs several multidisciplinary programs centered around place-based education and amplifying local responses to sea level rise adaptation and the impacts of climate-driven flooding, which includes her coordination of the community science flood mapping program, Catch the King. I'll now turn it over to Darren, who's going to get us started for today. Yep. Good to go?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. And I want to thank Cape Fear River Watch for making this venue available. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So how many people are familiar with the phrase high tide flooding? Okay, so that means you all probably know something about what a king tide is. Well, we're going to find out some more. This is Wilmington. This is tidal water. You can see the pavement's basically dry. This is water from the Cape Fear River. This has absolutely nothing to do with rain. It has nothing to do with hurricanes. There's no storms going on. And this is just tidal water from the Cape Fear River. You can see the Memorial Bridge there. You've all been here on Water Street, I'm sure. And this is actually by no means the worst that I have seen it. I've seen the water basically as far as you can see on Water Street and then back in this direction all the way in front of the federal courthouse. When I took this picture, you could actually see water rising around the rim of this manhole and coming out of some of the storm drains. In other words, the street drains into the Cape Fear River. Well, what that means is the Cape Fear River could back up when it's higher than the elevation of these. The water in the Cape Fear River rises up to match the level of the free water in the river, and that's high tide flooding because the Cape Fear River is tidal, has roughly the same tide range as the ocean around here, about 4 to 6 feet depending. When a king tide happens, which we'll see, you get higher high tides and lower low tides. So high tide flooding. Now, king tides happen when the sun and the moon align, and they cause exceptionally high tides. They also cause, as I said, exceptionally low tides. So this is from NOAA, the history of inundation events, and there's a definition of inundation events is when water rises a certain amount above mean high level. And you can see that, you know, things are pretty stable, and roughly about 1970, a sharp acceleration which roughly matches the rise in global average sea level. Now, when you hear the word sea level, there's relative sea level, absolute sea level, global average sea level. It's not the same everywhere. But This is global average sea level, meaning it has absolutely nothing to do with land subsidence. It's starting in, and I think we'll show the satellite started to measure it, is called the satellite era. So floods more often, and where this is taken is at the NOAA gauge at the Army Corps of Engineers station right on the other side of the river by the Memorial Bridge where you see all the big tugboats. So NOAA has a tide gauge there for the Cape Fear River. Now, this information is from this source. Let me see if I can,
Excuse me,
from,
what's considered the number that makes it a flood? What,
you mean for that inundation?
as far as that?
It's a certain, I can't remember, I think it's something like 3.5 feet above mean high water. You'd have to, I could look it back up with NOAA, I've forgotten the precise, but there is a definition of it. And if anybody has questions, I'll be stopping then near the end so we could take all the questions then. Thank you for that question. There is a definition if you look at NOAA inundation events. There, and I say it's some level above, I believe it's mean high water. Okay, so a lot of what I show, I do show my sources. NASA, these are not people who are like rocket scientists. These are people who are rocket scientists. Still the only organization in the world that's ever put people on the moon and brought them back safely. So this is what they say. Now, so the pictures you see, picture another foot deeper by 2050. Our children will certainly be, hopefully, alive in 2050. And then some other references to 2100 when our grandchildren, great-grandchildren should be around. This is not that far in the future. Now that's from Columbia University, but there's a similar number you'll see from NOAA. So picture now, within the lifetime of our grandchildren, certainly, another 4 or 5 feet of water, every picture you see. So this is Carolina Beach, November 2021, which was still, from what I've been able to observe in Carolina Beach, the highest king tide I've seen, although the one we just had came close. Now, this has got nothing to do with rain. It has nothing to do with hurricanes. It has nothing to do with storms. None of that was happening. And you can actually see here the water was flowing. See, the boat basin is like, okay, you take the picture behind me was the boat basin. Well, you can, and then you could, of course, you could see the Hampton Inn. And the water was flowing over the curb here, flooded all this area up to the Hampton Inn. The McDonald's is over here. This is high tide flooding. Has nothing to do with the weather. So now this is a technical report put together by various government agencies who rely on academic scientific information. You can see this report, which they come out, I can't remember, it's about every 3 or 4 years they update it. NOAA, NASA, Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Geological Survey, Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Defense. So this is not a bunch of, people talk about there's a Chinese communist plot and all that kind of, that's who put together this report. Okay, by 2050, a serious increase in coastal tidal flooding. Some of us probably still be around in 2050. Again, picture what you see with another 3, 5, 6 feet of water. And this is from these agencies, from this report, which you can all get off the internet. Okay, so what's a king tide? Strong gravitational and inertial forces of a perigean spring tide. Well, perigee just means close. So it's when the moon and the earth are close together, because the moon and the earth don't go in a perfectly circular orbit. The orbit is an ellipse, so sometimes the moon is closer to the earth than other times. And spring tide has absolutely nothing to do with summer, spring, fall. And nothing to do with that. Spring tides are exceptionally high and low tides due to the position of the moon. They could happen at any time of year. This saying came about because the tides spring forth. It has nothing to do with spring, the season. So here we go, there we go, there's the moon. So when you have a full moon, the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon are lined up. The Moon's on the opposite side of the Earth, and you can see the orbit is an ellipse. So if it's close, then the gravitational effect of the Moon is greater than when it's far away. And since it's in a straight line, its gravitational effect is greater, and you have exceptionally high and exceptionally low tides. So it's called a super full moon because it's a full moon, and if it's closer to the Earth, then you can actually see it looks bigger. You know, when you go out and they say it's a super full moon, if you got a good view, it is bigger. Well, it's not bigger, it looks bigger because it's closer, and it truly is. And so the perigee, that's what they saw perigee in tide. It just means perigee as in close to the Earth. And then you've got the new moon. Well, some people say, what is a new moon? New moon is no moon. So, same deal. The moon is similar. The moon is in a direct line, but now you can't see it because it's tracking with the sun, and you're not going to see the moon when it's kind of washed out by the light of the sun. So, it's close to the Earth because it's elliptical orbit. And it's a new moon. Well, this stuff happens not regularly, usually several times a year, but it's not like it happens on the same day of the year or days each time. So that is a super new moon, but you don't see the super new moon because it's new moon is no moon. So that's what causes king tides, period. It's not a scientific term, it's a popular descriptive term, but it's just when the sun, the earth, and the moon are close together and they are aligned to make the tide range its maximum, maximum high, maximum low. Now it actually gets amplified a little bit because the Earth's orbit around the sun is also not perfectly circular. Sometimes it's closer to the sun, so you can really get even bigger if this happens when the Earth and the sun are close together, which doesn't happen quite as often. And it does happen once a year, but the sun does not have as big an effect on our tide as the moon, because even though it's far more massive, it's also much farther away. This is Carolina Beach. Now, I didn't take this photo, so I don't have a date on it. You can see it's a sunny day. It's nothing to do with storms and rain. Okay, there's the Carolina Beach Harbor Boat Basin. It's connected to the ocean with Carolina Beach Inlet over here. The water flows up over the seawalls, the bulkheads here, and that's Canal Drive. That's now. Start thinking about that 4 and 5 degree deeper water within the lifetime of our grandchildren. Myrtle Beach. So here's the North Carolina King Tides calendar, which, by the way, you can Google it and you can get the calendar. So the orange shows when king tides happen. You can see they're kind of irregular because there's a lot of variables. Super full moon. And so we just went through this king tide phase. We got more king tides coming. I'll be out of the country, so I won't be able to get any good pictures of it. But if you all know where it tends to flood, Canal Street in Canal Drive in Carolina Beach. Sometimes the Lee's Cut neighborhood in Wrightsville Beach is getting close. Downtown Wilmington, Water Street, and you can look up the time of high tides for these areas and know when the flooding will take place. The high tide in Carolina Beach usually happens about an hour later than what the tide tables show because they tell you about the tide out in the ocean. But Wilmington, it's right at the time of Wilmington high tide because they measure that tide at the NOAA station, and that's right near Water Street. So this is when your exceptional high tides are going to occur. Now it's much affected by weather and oceanographic conditions, wind, atmospheric pressure, things that can't be predicted far in advance, but the astronomy can. So astronomically, these are the dates, and then things vary for other reasons. So here is, now if I can get this to do what I want it to do, This is Curie Beach during a king tide. It's not a nor'easter, it's not a hurricane. And if I can get this video to play. By the way, you might notice the debris. These exceptionally high tides tend to bring in a lot of debris into the ocean, which you're going to hear about. So one of the questions you could ask is, how much longer is that house? The house is still there. But in fact, I saw it the other day and the lights were on outdoors during the day. So here they are burning up electricity, which causes carbon dioxide to go to the atmosphere. Anyway, you don't really need outside light during the day. So there's no conceivable way this house is going to make it. I don't know if it's going to be 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, but it ain't going to be there 10, 20 years from now. It'll be a pile of debris out into the ocean because there's no laws or regulations requiring anybody to demolish their house just because it's going to get destroyed. Those houses up in Rodanthe, the crap is just washing into the ocean. Now they do, Park Service and others clean up some of it, which washes onto the beaches because it's hazardous, but it's not a general cleanup. A lot of it's out in the ocean. That includes all the chemicals, the air conditioning systems, sewage systems, whatever was left in the house, the electrical wiring. So it's not over. I just took this picture. Carolina, now sometimes the king tides happen at night, and so it's, it's harder to get a picture because around here we have what's called the semi-diurnal mixed tide, meaning there's 2 high tides a day and one of them is higher than the other. So you usually only get the high tide flooding or the serious flooding during the higher of the 2 high tides, and sometimes that's at night. High tides are about 12 hours apart each day. High, 6 hours later it's low, 6 hours later it's high, roughly. So there's the Hampton Inn again. Now, I don't think when people decided to develop and build these properties that there was flooding like this going on. I have trouble picturing that somebody would have decided to invest money in a property if it regularly flooded like this and they knew that 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now it's going to be 4 or 5 feet higher. This is high tide flooding. And it's not just here. There's serious high tide flooding in Miami, in Charleston, to some extent in Savannah, Georgia. It's very serious in Norfolk, Virginia, serious in Annapolis, Virginia, Boston, Portland, Maine, New York City, to a lesser degree on the West Coast because of their topography, but parts of San Francisco, Honolulu and Washington State experience high tide flooding. So this is Socastee, as I've been told, that's out South Carolina. It's got nothing to do with rain. This is close to the ocean. The intercoastal waterway runs past here, and that's where the water comes from on the exceptionally high tides. I drove around this area, not during the flood, I didn't take this picture, and some of it is a lower income area than it might look like in this picture, meaning that some of the people who live there don't really maybe have the resources to just say, well, I think I'll leave, because my house gets flooding. Now picture 4 or 5 feet of deeper water. Okay, sea level rise shown to drive coastal erosion, a study. There are dozens, including the Army Corps of Engineers, that link the obvious that the higher the water level, the faster it erodes. Now, the reason I mention that is because there are people who will say, you hear it, it's not sea level rise, it's erosion. Well, that's like saying it's not smoking cigarettes, it's lung cancer. Yeah, the sea level rise drives the erosion. And, anyway, you can look it up academically, but the Army Corps of Engineers had it in their 1983 manual. And the Army Corps of Engineers knows about as much about the eternal battle between land and sea as anybody. Anyway, okay, so here we go. This is Masonboro Island at Carolina Beach Inlet. And I took this. Let me see if we can get this to work. I'll hold it. Okay, I guess this one's not the video. But it's obvious to see the level of water. The higher the water, the faster this beach is going to erode. I thought I had that on video. Okay, well, I don't. I have it, but not in this presentation. But on the video, you can see the stuff falling down. You can see, like in here, there are big trees that have fallen down in here. Well, obviously, those trees didn't grow down in the water. They were up here, and then they were up high, and then the beach eroded away. So the deeper the sea level, the higher sea level, faster coasts erode. Okay, so what does this got to do with climate change? Well, it does. Again, NASA. Now, once you get to the satellite era, it has absolutely nothing to do with vertical land motion. This is tide gauges, so they do reflect vertical land motion, land subsidence, which is an issue, which is a factor, but not here. Now, kind of one of the interesting things here is look at the slope of if you kind of go with an average slope, sea level rise is accelerating. You can see that it's going up faster now than it did in the early 1900s. And now the average global sea level, and it's different in a lot of places for a lot of reasons, and we are actually more than average sea level rise. Now it's interesting, what's contributed to it, mountain glaciers melting, the Greenland ice sheet melting, Antarctic ice sheet melting, thermal expansion because water gets bigger when it gets hot, but this is kind of interesting, minus global dam projects. It's hard to believe, but there's actually enough water, if you count the whole world, impounded behind dams, that it actually affects the sea level. The sea would be a little bit higher if all those dams weren't there. I just find that to be an amazing fact. Okay, it's accelerating, and it's rising now faster than this on the global average. Okay, why? Well, the ocean's getting warmer. Because the atmosphere is getting warmer. When the atmosphere gets warmer, the ocean gets warmer. In fact, roughly 90% of the additional heat that is in our planetary system due to greenhouse gases is in the ocean, not the atmosphere. So let's look a little bit at the long term. Carbon dioxide, which is the chief, not the only, but the principal anthropogenic caused by humans, greenhouse meaning heat trapping gas. There's others, methane is important, but carbon dioxide is about 75% of the human caused warming is due to excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Well, carbon dioxide, global average temperature, and sea level all kind of have moved in sync. Now, look at what's going on with carbon dioxide now. And it's actually now it's up to about 424, depending what time of year you measure it. So it's way higher than it's been throughout the ice ages and the periods in between the ice ages. Way higher than it's been. And sea level has tracked temperature and carbon dioxide. But it takes a long time. You know, if you take an ice cube out of the refrigerator, it doesn't melt right away. Things take time, and the Earth is a lot bigger than an ice cube in a refrigerator, so it takes a long time for things to change. So it's very possible that we've already built in a lot of sea level rise. It just hasn't happened yet, but the heat is already there. It just takes time for the ice to melt, takes time for the ocean to catch the heat from the atmosphere. So again, back to our technical report. You saw this. So just reflect on this with the pictures we've already seen. And what I said, we could show you pictures all over the place, Miami, Norfolk, Annapolis. Now, since this was written, global emissions of greenhouse gases have hit an all-time high. Failing to curb future emissions. They're higher now than they've ever been. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is higher than it's ever been in all periods of measurement. Okay, oh, and there's more. There's more cheerful news. Who has heard about the phrase moon wobble? Okay, well, in addition to the fact, very good, in addition to the factors that we talked about, the plane at which the plane of the moon's orbit relative to the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun, they change positions too. That's called the, quote, moon wobble. And so what we are in is actually a low period, meaning that the planes are kind of not lined up very well. So the tides are not excessively high or low for this reason. This goes in an 18.6 year cycle. So roughly in the mid-2030s, 10 years from now, we're going to be a part of the cycle where the tide range increases. The highs will get higher, the lows will get lower, because the moon and the earth will be even more lined up than they are now. That's the moon wobble on the 18.6 year cycle. So 10 years from now, even not counting the effects of emissions and warming, the high tides will be higher and low tides will be lower than they are now. In my humble opinion, I think that probably high tide flooding is going to be the first effect of climate change that is really going to wake our general society up to the fact that we have to do something other than just deny that it's happening. Now, maybe if the hurricanes like the one we just hit, the unfortunate people in the western part of the state, maybe that will. But the hurricanes are complicated. You could argue against them and all that. But sea level rise and climate change is a fairly simple connection. It's very photogenic. You could see it. And there's a lot of people who live on the east coast of the United States. So, all likelihood, we're going to see higher high tide flooding. And not 50 years in the future, but each year it gets a little more. Now, it doesn't mean this year is worse than last year, but the general trend is upward because the Earth is getting warmer. So, why does climate change cause exceptionally high sea level or global sea level rise? Well, the first thing is land-based ice is melting. When icebergs that are floating in the ocean melt, it doesn't make any difference for sea level because the water's already in the ocean. But land-based ice, like Greenland, Antarctica, mountain glaciers, they do matter because that water's on land in the form of ice. And when it melts now, it's in the ocean in the form of liquid water. You can go here, okay? This is right outside of Juneau, Alaska. This is the Mendenhall Glacier. You can go here. You can take a tourist trip. You can go to Juneau, Alaska, and they'll take you in a bus, with a hiking group, and you can go out and walk around the Mendenhall Glacier, and there's signs that show you where and that wasn't that long ago, was it? That's where the ice was. Now it's down here. There are other places where you can see glacier recession as well. Well, so land-based ice melts. What used to be on land is now in the ocean, and water just expands when it gets warmer. That's why we have expansion tanks, some of us in our house, so that when the water heater heats the water up, it doesn't back up into the water system. It absorbs the expansion of the water. Now, it doesn't expand a heck of a lot when it warms up 1 or 2 degrees, but the ocean is on the average 11,000 feet deep. So it doesn't have to expand a lot to raise a foot. And that actually causes more melting for 2 reasons. One, obviously, warm water, where it contacts the ice shelves, will melt them faster than cooler water, and the water's a little deeper, so there's a greater area of contact. So this is it. This is the chance for questions or comments before our next speaker. We'll take maybe 1 or 2 because we got to keep going. So does anybody have any questions or comments about this? Go ahead, sir.
What's your thought about beach replenishment?
I get into that in some other presentations. I think it's becoming unaffordable. Now, Wrightsville Beach's got a lot of money. Rodanthe does not. And the governments in Rodanthe, local government, said we don't have the money to do beach replenishment. And they've lost, 9 houses this year into the ocean. So what happens is the sand gets more and more people want it. It gets harder to find. The more offshore you get, the more expensive to get the sand, the more expensive it is. Now, there are a lot of people have their eyes on frying pan shoals because there's a lot of sand out there and it's not very deep. And there's a lot of beach communities in North South Carolina would like that sand to dump on. But there are studies being done right now, UNCW to their credit, of what will be the ecological impacts. Frying pan shoals is a fishing area. Those sand shallows enter into the ecology. Do we just want to dredge up all that sand? So my thought is it's becoming unaffordable. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I know this doesn't tie in only with tides, but the current storm is going to wash downstream. Do you have any idea at all what's going to do to our Cape Fear River along with the tide rises?
Well, I could tell you that, and I'm not sure if this relates to exactly your question, there's a good satellite picture you can find of the North Carolina, our section of the coast, after Hurricane Florence. And it doesn't quite show the Cape Fear River, but it's going to be happening there too. The New River, the White Oak River, the Newport River, I think. It shows a huge plume of black, basically pollution from land, going out into miles into the ocean, and it's very discernible because your excessive rainfalls, they wash all the stuff from land, the animal waste, the oil and stuff from streets, pet droppings. They wash a lot of excess fertilizer that gets dumped on lawns and golf courses and stuff, which drives me crazy. It washes that stuff into the ocean. So I don't know if that answers your question, but excessive rains tend to take pollution that is sitting on land and wash it into the water.
Can I make a comment on that? I'm a statewide paddler, and so I know about river basins. The Cape Fear Basin is basically from up just north of Greensboro, Winston-Salem area. The areas that have been hit aren't, you don't hear about big problems in Winston-Salem right now.
Is that past the Continental Divide? Or?
No, it's not. It's kind of a state divide. It's just a different river basin. And so the rivers that have been hit are the ones that go down through South Carolina, the Yadkin, PD, the Broad, that goes down through Columbia. You probably noticed if you go to Columbia, South Carolina, you cross a lot of rivers there.
Yes, right.
And those are the rivers there.
Yeah, and I believe some of them even drain west, like through Tennessee. Yeah. The gentleman's absolutely. The rivers in Asheville, as a general rule, don't flow this way. They don't flow into the Cape Fear River.
My backyard floods whenever Fayetteville and Raleigh get hit, so I pay a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, so those rivers generally flow somewhere else, and they're dumping a lot of that soil, which is the most common water pollutant in the United States, and other things elsewhere. But we have hurricanes here too. Okay, anything else before our next speaker? Yes, ma'am.
I saw a news program about weather and the moon, and it talked about this small moon that's going around the moon.
Yeah, the one that's temporary moon.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know anything, honestly, I don't know anything about it.
Okay.
So that's probably, I've used up more than my share of time, so thank you everybody. And then our next speaker will give you more good news about plastic junk in the ocean. Which, by the way, after these king high tides, I paddle all the time too, there's a lot more stuff in the estuaries after these exceptionally high tides. Abandoned vessels, ghost crab pots, broken docks, just general debris. Okay, so that gentleman will.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this. And we got this gizmo.
Thank you. Good to go. All right, awesome. Okay. All right, so I am Emily Mulvihill, and I'll be talking about how king tides can impact marine debris being transported into the ocean. So NOAA defines marine debris as any persistent solid material that is manufactured or processed and directly or indirectly, intentionally or unintentionally, disposed of or abandoned into the marine environment or the Great Lakes. And marine debris has had detrimental effects on the ecosystem and is known to impact down to the species level. Size fractions range from microplastics, so these are particles smaller than 5 millimeters in diameter, to derelict fishing gear and abandoned vessels. And so human activity is the main cause of why marine debris is such a huge issue for the world. And so plastic items are the most common type of marine debris found in our ocean, waterways, and the Great Lakes. And it stems from the problem of humans having a disposable lifestyle. So we're using more plastic than we need to. And so it's been estimated that 50% of the plastic produced is designed to be used just once and then thrown away. And we refer to these as single-use plastics. And they come in many different forms, such as plastic grocery bags, straws, food wrappers, plastic utensils, and various forms of packaging. And so due to the magnitude of production and the lack of infrastructure for proper disposal, plastic pollution has become a worldwide issue. And this crisis does not discriminate. It affects everyone. When plastics are not disposed of properly, items can end up in stormwater drains, rivers, streams, and other waterways like the ocean. And this has resulted in plastic pollution being found all over the world. And Oceana estimates that 33 billion pounds of plastics enters the ocean every year. This is equivalent to 2 garbage trucks worth of plastic entering the ocean every minute. And so plastics are made to be durable and last a long time. And this is beneficial when using plastic in our daily lives, but these characteristics become more harmful when plastic ends up in our environment. And so plastic is different from other forms of waste as it's not able to decompose or break down into the environment, which results in some plastic items sticking around indefinitely, causing negative impacts to the surrounding environment. And so how does pollution enter the ocean in the first place and become marine debris? So scientists have found that between 70 to 80% of marine debris comes from land sources. So this includes littering, construction site debris, agriculture, and other industrial activities. And there are 2 main pathways that cause pollution to be transported into the ocean. So they are natural disasters. So when hurricanes, tropical storms, or flooding impact coastal or marine environments, that causes pollution to be scattered in their wake. Waterways and stormwater drains are another pathway for pollution inland or upstream to be transported down into the ocean. And research has shown that roadside litter accounts for 75% of the trash in our nation's waterways. So that means that each time it rains, trash is funneled through storm drainage systems, and that can lead into fresh water and the ocean environment. While only 20% of marine debris comes from ocean sources. So this includes abandoned and discarded fishing gear, or vessels, cargo ships losing containers, or illegal dumping in the ocean. And so king tides can cause marine debris or an increase of marine debris to be deposited into the ocean. So king tides extend farther up beaches. They can cover salt marsh environments and low-lying coastal communities. As a result, these tides interact with pollution that's further up the beach or any marine debris trapped in salt marsh environments, and even reaching litter on roadways. So salt marshes are prone to trapping marine debris typically during high tide when the salt marsh is predominantly submerged. And then as the waters recede and the tide goes back into the ocean, that results in pollution being left behind. And because of salt marshes in the tide cycles, this pollution can be repeatedly transported away and redeposited which further increases the impact of plastic pollution. So human activity is the primary cause for pollution on beaches. So here in Wilmington, we know how populous the tourist season can be, and that leads to the increase of pollution, or land-based pollution, being deposited on the beach and entering the coastal ecosystem. North Carolina king tides are expected in April through November, and plastic distribution research shows the abundance of plastic debris is significantly greater in the summer than in the winter. And this corresponds with when the public and tourists are enjoying the beaches more. And this could potentially amplify the introduction of debris leading into the ocean during these king tide events. And so, as Warren previously discussed, king tides can lead to coastal flooding, and coastal flooding and marine debris are both connected to climate change, which can have significant repercussions for public health, the environment, and the economy. Research shows that coastal flooding primarily results in the transportation of plastic and significantly increases the amount of plastic debris entering the ocean. And so when flooding and king tides, when those waters recede, these physical and chemical pollutants can be carried into the ocean or transported onto the shoreline. And so the movement of marine debris by king tides and associated flooding can lead to a lot of harm for the marine environment as debris accumulates in these areas. And so coastal flooding can also transport a broad range of materials, spanning from litter and household items to construction site debris and hazardous waste. So this includes flood tides that may pick up chemicals like oil and gas from the street, or agricultural fertilizers, or pesticides from lawns. And so, as I mentioned previously, natural disasters cause a lot of damage to infrastructures along coastlines. And as the frequency of extreme weather events increase, this can also cause an increase in marine debris being introduced to the ocean. So as coastal floodlines increase, they can interact with more land-based pollutants, transporting plastic into the ocean or marine environment. While coastal flooding can lead to the funnel of marine debris into rivers, which can then be discharged into the marine environment. And so while talking about plastic pollution in waterways, one of Plastic Ocean Project's recent research collaborations is with Keep New Hanover Beautiful. So we're looking at the relationship between sea bins and plastic pollution in waterways. So a sea bin is a marine debris removal device that's situated in a slow-moving body of water, like a marina. And so it is anchored to a floating dock with electricity, and it contains an oilcloth at the bottom. When plugged in, the sea bin sinks just below the surface of the water, and the pump pulls floating debris into the basket, filtering the water. So we are looking at the macroplastics in local marinas like Bradley Creek and Port City. And so as sea levels keep rising, king tide flood events are expected to worsen over time. And this can impact the daily tidal water levels, which will cause tides to be increasing further up the beach, interacting with more land-based pollutants. And this can also cause harm to the marine habitat, not only for the habitat and the organisms that live there, but also for the communities that rely on these waters for their livelihood. But there are solutions to combat these issues. So the collaborative Catch the King events here in Wilmington have a cleanup component. So this is part of Trees for Trash program. So while volunteers are out mapping the high tide line of king tides, we also ask them to recover any trash that they find along the beach. And so Trees for Trash was started in 2019 after the devastation caused by Hurricane Florence, which destroyed several of Wilmington's old growth trees. and also spewed tons of trash both on land and in the ocean. And so this initiative addresses two critical issues: climate change and marine debris. And so this initiative proposes to plant 1 hardwood tree for every 25 pounds of trash we remove from the North Carolina environment. And so the trees are a really crucial part in fighting against climate change and also helping with carbon sequestration. So thanks to companies, organizations, schools, and individuals, we have been able to remove over 55,000 pounds of trash from the North Carolina environment. And what started in the New Hanover County area has now expanded into Pender and Brunswick as well. And the trees from this initiative have mostly been planted at the New Hanover County landfill. And with about 2,000 trees planted there now, we've established what we call Fran's Forest, which is a 5.3 virgin acre forest located on 2 uncapped mounds at the New Hanover County landfill. And so cleanups are typically what people think of when they think of ways to combat plastic pollution and marine debris. And we say the best ocean cleanup is a land cleanup, meaning cleaning up beaches, cities, and parks and neighborhoods. These are all good preventative measures from plastic entering the ocean in the first place. And so land cleanups aid in restoration and protecting marine and terrestrial organisms, while also promoting awareness and education to marine debris and plastic pollution. So by participating in a land cleanup, you're helping to create a cleaner ocean. So Wetlands Watch and Plastic Ocean Project first joined forces in the summer of 2023. The main initiative of this partnership was to create a hybrid event with Catch the King's community science flood mapping efforts with Plastic Ocean Project's marine debris removal program. And so working towards the common goal of making Wilmington a cleaner and safer place, both for humans and the natural environment. And we wanted to bring this crucial information of the impacts caused by king tides and sea level rise to our audience in the Wilmington community. And so since August of 2023, Plastic Ocean Project has partnered on 5 tracking tide events. And so this has resulted in the recovery of over 47 pounds of trash removed from the Wrightsville Beach area. So we're very close to earning 2 trees with this partnership. And as this partnership continues to grow, we can't wait to see the positive impact and the change that we can make for the Wilmington community. Thanks. That's it. Oh, yeah, if we have time. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, if anyone has any questions. Anything? No?
Where can you find information on your cleanup efforts?
Yeah, so I have a card that I can give you, and that has our website on it.
It's on the website.
Just plasticoceanproject.org, and we also have an Adopt a Highway program along Highway 421 that's on the way to the landfill. We typically remove well over 100 or 200 pounds of trash for those events, and we're always having different cleanups. Okay. Anything else? No? Okay. Of course.
I'd like a card.
Huh?
I'd like a card.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I hope you guys are excited to learn more about how you can get involved, because that is what I'll be talking about. And I do want to be mindful of time, so do you want me to pause at 10 or just keep going? Okay, cool. So hi everybody, my name's Gabi Kinney. I am the Community Engagement Project Manager. It's a bit of a mouthful, so I always have to remind myself what my title is. At Wetlands Watch, and we are a nonprofit based in Norfolk, Virginia, experiencing the highest rate of sea level rise on the eastern coast. And I'm going to talk today about our community science program called Catch the King. This is a program that Emily just mentioned. We've partnered with POP here, and I'll give you guys some details on what we're up to. So before that, I want to introduce you to the organization Wetlands Watch. So we work where land, communities, and water meet to conserve nature in a changing climate. And if I were to put this on a picture, I would say we work about right here. And what we're looking at here is a resident that may have bought this home or rented this home with the idea that they have a beautiful coastal landscape to look at. They have access to the water. They might just, maybe their family has lived there before and they bring their kids there as a holiday home. But what we're concerned about is this changing ecosystem. So when this resident moved in, we probably don't imagine that that water was there when he moved in. And so we are noticing as sea levels rise, not only is the water reaching the doorsteps of some people's homes, as we've seen the homes in Rodanthe falling, some homes in Wilmington, Carolina Beach, traveling over streets and into the community, we're also seeing a migration of ecosystems. So we're called Wetlands Watch because we care deeply about our wetlands, both the impacts from humans and the impacts from nature. So as sea levels rise, and the current rate of sea level rise is actually rising at a pace that wetlands cannot outgrow vertically. So as wetlands grow vertically, sea levels are rising too fast for wetlands to outpace it. So in some areas where they don't have any room to migrate inland, they're actually drowning in place. So we're really concerned with what this looks like. How do we facilitate the migration of wetlands while also keeping people who have settled on the coast safe? What are their options for moving away and doing that equitably? We were formed from kind of a kitchen table advocacy group. So we, our former executive director, Skip Stiles, as well as some neighborhood folks were defending a wetlands development permit. And that's kind of how our organization was born, was protecting the wetlands from development. We have a ton of program areas: community science, policy, green infrastructure, so nature-based approaches to adaptation. Local planning, we work a ton with local governments. As was mentioned earlier, I'm a certified floodplain manager now, so I took the big FEMA course, and I get to talk with local governments about their planning efforts to approach sea level rise and flooding. And all of this is kind of in the name of climate adaptation. We're in the General Assembly in Virginia each year fighting for environmental legislation, and then of course my favorite part, the community science program. And we're trying to do this creatively. So our community science program is one way that we're trying to engage the public while also collecting really critical data on how sea level rise is impacting communities. Lauren has done a great job of kind of teaching you guys about king tides already, so I won't tell you too much more other than just showing some pictures from NOAA. And this is that 2050 time frame. Right now we're experiencing about 45 to 70 days of high tide nuisance flooding. So when flooding just during a normal high tide cycle rolls into our communities. And by 2050, we could experience as many as 85 to 125 days of year. And this is just Norfolk. And so that means about a third of the year, we're going to see water in the streets, the way that those images that Warren was showing earlier were showing. This is what it looks like in Norfolk. These are real pictures, not unfamiliar to you guys from the presentations already. This is a really unique site in Norfolk where wetlands are actually jumping across the road. I actually think I have a slide on that in a moment. But what's really important to highlight here is that yes, sea level rise is growing, tidal flooding is increasing, we're seeing a lot more flooding on our coasts, but building flood resilience and building up communities to adapt to the issue of flooding also means planning for rainfall. So that big Hurricane Helene that just rolled through, tropical storms and things like that are growing in intensity and frequency and duration, and so dumping a lot more rain into our non-coastal communities. So having a really rounded flood resilience effort, statewide, regionally, locally, means tidal and rainfall flooding. This is focusing in on that issue of wetlands migration. So in this instance, as sea levels rise and this area is frequently inundated, the wetlands, oh, I do have a clicker, don't I? Haha. Wetlands that were hanging out on this side of the road are jumping across the road to populate wherever they possibly can. And so us as humans, when we see this happening, we can imagine we might want to take a little bit of responsibility for figuring out what we should do with this area to help facilitate that migration. We love our wetland ecosystems. They do so much for us. And so protecting them means also looking at what are we preventing them from doing in terms of migration. So we can look at this site as an adaptation site. This is what that looks like kind of this is a graphic that we show in some of our wetlands migration talks. So how do we manage this kind of migration when you meet infrastructure and homes and private property? What is this migration, as well as the jurisdictional kind of oversight over these areas, so regulatory agencies that manage development in these areas? As sea levels rise, all of that is shifting landward. So how do we facilitate that migration? How do we transform infrastructure and built spaces into natural open space that wetlands like? It's a big question. These are some images. So we're also, with king tides and flooding in particular, just concerned with the interactions of flooding in the landscape. So this is someone's backyard. I heard someone mention earlier that they see flooding in their backyard even just from a rainstorm. So what is this doing to people's yards as wetlands are starting to migrate in as well? Do you mow the wetlands that are coming into your yard to keep your polished yard? The answer is no. And also community spaces, so parks, recreational areas that we have built up for the public to enjoy. How is the water preventing access to those areas? And this is one of those storm drain instances as well. So it's coming up pretty high here, but there's a nice rock wall. But the flooding is actually coming up through this storm drain right here. And this is right by the battleship, I believe. So again, kind of centering the whole issue of king tides with this Catch the King program that we'll learn more about. We're starting to notice some pictures coming in of various kind of indicators that sea level rise and saltwater intrusion is changing our communities. We're seeing salt bush pop up in storm drains. This is a sycamore tree, I believe, that looks pretty lonely and barren because this area is flooded frequently, and so the grass around it is dying, it's hardening, it's drying out. Storm drains, of course, one of my favorites. We call this alligator pavement. So as salt water sits on pavement in roads for a long amount of time, it actually dries and cracks that pavement because of the salt. And then, like I said, wetlands coming into the backyard. So you can see they've mowed just up to the edge, and you can actually see a little bit, if I can keep my hand steady, a little bit of where that like flooding line comes in, so that discoloration on the plants. And then so this is their front gate. So wetlands are moving in. Now Catch the King, and this is our logo. He's the Elvis, of course, the king. So if you participate in Catch the King, you're hanging out with Elvis, just know. And all of our t-shirts you can see me wearing has our Catch the King Elvis logo on it as well. So our history of this program, we actually developed something called the Sea Level Rise app. So this is a mobile phone app. You guys might use Seek or iNaturalist and those kinds of citizen science-based apps. We developed something for tracking king tide flooding called the Sea Level Rise app. We launched this in 2014 after Hurricane Sandy, and this was because we noticed a lot of that community effort rise from those big storms. So when a hurricane rolls through, people are on Facebook, they're messaging their neighbors, they're trying to get people to safety. And so we thought we could do the same thing just with nuisance and sunny day high tide flooding. Our biggest Catch the King event was held in 2017. Again, this is a Virginia-based program in its initiation, but I'll talk a little bit more about how we got into North Carolina in a little bit. We actually broke a Guinness World Record in 2017 for this program. It was most contributions to an environmental survey. We had over 700 volunteers that year and almost 60,000 data points. All of the mapping that we do through Catch the King contributes to flood modeling at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, as well as some local governments who actually use the data and maps that we produce to help figure out where it's flooding and keep an idea of how it's worsening over time. And that flood modeling at VIMS, there's a kind of prediction model that's been developed. I actually think I have pictures on it later, so I will wait to go into that. This program itself, of course, my favorite parts of it is that it's a public awareness building program. So while you're out there with your phone mapping, you can interact with other folks who are interacting with the floodwater, keeping people safe and being a part of the climate solution. So it's a lot of doom and gloom when we talk about the projections, especially into the future. But when we study them now, we can start making assumptions about what it's like in the future. And then we've organized teams and data collections all over coastal Virginia, but also now into North Carolina. You've seen this graphic already. It's a good one. So I'm not going to go too much into king tides since we've already learned about it. But the most important thing to know is that king tides of today could be our predicted normal of the future. So the reason why it's important for us to go out into the communities during these king tide events and figure out where it's flooding and how it's impacting the community, because this could be our new normal in 2050 and 2100. So the more we know about it today, the more we can prep for it in the future. These are some more pictures of flooding in Norfolk. As you can see, we all love our pictures of flooding, just to show you what it looks like. This is a community, it's called Colonial Place in Norfolk. And we're also concerned, of course, not just with the flooding and how it's affecting the land and maybe access. Things like flood days are happening in our area. So instead of snow days or sick days, we have flood days in Norfolk. Because buses are not, they can't float. We're not that futuristic yet where they can transform into a boat and pick up kids from their front yards when there's water. And so this is a picture of those kids who've hopped out of the bus and can't make it around the corner. We are, of course, also concerned with what all of those high tide floodwaters are capturing on the landscape and bringing back with it, as with the marine debris conversation, dog poop, fertilizers, all of that. We can capture pictures of this with our sea level rise app through Catch the King. So these are things that we're documenting. Storm drains, of course, we love our storm drains. I'm from a teeny tiny town in southern Vermont, and I did not grow up with signs in my community that says, hey, it floods here. So this was very new to me when I started moving into cities and working in sea level rise and flooding issues, to start seeing actual signs that said, hey, it may flood here, or road closed when it's flooded, when it's parking lot closed when it's flooded. Things like that are completely new to me. And then, of course, and again, real pictures. This is from Norfolk, Virginia. And so we've got this combination of factors, right? This bus is really trying to make it to get to school, and we've also got trash in the foreground. So what is the Sea Level Rise app? It looks a little like this. This is your kind of tools tab in the app, which if you stick around for the actual app training, you'll get to learn all about how to use it. Every GPS pin that is dropped in our Sea Level Rise app, and I'll tell you why we do that in a moment, it correlates to this beautiful Excel spreadsheet. And I'm an Excel spreadsheet nerd, so I love seeing this. Every GPS pin that's dropped correlates to a highly precise GPS coordinate. It's got other information like who collected it, when, where, what's the degree of accuracy, and those kinds of things. But just to show you what it looks like, what you're collecting versus what we see on the back end. This is that flood modeling I mentioned at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. So this light blue layer that you're seeing is the flood prediction model. This is a 36-hour model, so all of the math and algorithms that go into creating this model say, if we have an upcoming high tide cycle, here's where the flooding is going to be. So during a king tide event, this is a map that's populating all of the data we've collected since 2017. Every color is a different year. The researcher goes in and says, okay, this is where my flood model said that the king tide was going to flood, and this is what the volunteers are saying. And so we can actually validate what the model is saying and adjust that model to fit where the volunteers, obviously this particular picture has not been adjusted yet. It also depends on the timing. So if the model is saying this is what it's going to be right at high tide and our volunteer might have gone out a little bit before or a little bit after, that's why sometimes you see a difference in the line there. But just showing how that all meets up. We sometimes call this ground truthing or validating flood prediction models. Community science is science for everyone. So we get a ton of different groups participating in this program, master naturalists, master gardeners. These are Girl Scouts down here in the bottom left. These are master naturalists, master gardeners in the middle. This is our youngest mapper of all. That's a newborn baby on this mother's chest. So she got a little bit of a shout out. I think this was 2 years ago during our volunteer appreciation event for youngest mapper in Catch the King. It was awesome. And then there's some water quality programs that run alongside us. So the top left and bottom right are with something called Measure the Muck. They were born after they learned about Catch the King, so a little bit of fun naming there. And they actually go out during these king tide events and sample the water quality to see how much gross bacteria. I know there's some fecal bacteria that they study. I don't think they do microplastics, but they do a couple of different nutrients. They take it back to the lab at Old Dominion University, and we've learned that during one high tide event such as this, we blow our TMDL goals, so the total maximum daily load limits that we have in the Chesapeake Bay for our community, out of the water for the whole year. So really daunting stuff. So North Carolina, I've talked a lot about Virginia, but why are we here? Wilmington actually has the highest acceleration rate of sea level rise on the eastern coast. This is from those same technical reports and documents that Warren was mentioning earlier. And you can go in and find this high tide flood day map and click around and see what it's like in your community for what those nuisance days are going to be. I mentioned 85 to 125 days in Norfolk, Virginia. This is from the Beaufort Lab. In 68 days is the prediction for 2050 here. And I point this out because this is the intermediate assumption. So we can predict all sorts of things with the data we're collecting. The intermediate means kind of the average, the median, but they're also intermediate high, intermediate low scenarios. We don't know which one we're going to end up in because things are accelerating. Sea level rise is growing, climate change is not stopping, and so depending on what the future looks like, this could look a lot different. But just know the intermediate prediction, kind of that median prediction, is 68 days a year you will experience that high tide sunny day flooding. And some more pictures. Sorry we've made you guys super sad this morning. Morehead City is, of course, another really big area getting hit by sea level rise. Seeing these just massive events. Drone footage goes a long way, as well as aerial photos. So if you have ties to pilot programs, or you might have a drone certificate, things like that, we love these kinds of photos because it shows that expanse of the impact. So we can see it, of course, at the ground level, but seeing how far into the community that water is coming is really, really important. And again, flooding is not tide-driven. Warren touched on this a little bit. It can also be influenced by wind, rainfall, and even the flow of rate or position of the Gulf Stream. So lots of different factors to consider when we're talking about flooding. So why are we in North Carolina? In 2023, Wetlands Watch was actually approached by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They were doing an inventory on coastal monitoring projects and trying to figure out who seems like they've got a nice developed app that we can fund and try to get an expansion pilot in. 2022. I said 2023. Time flies. So they approached us and they said, we really like your program, Catch the King. Here's some money. Go check it out in North Carolina. Of course, I'm a UNCW alumni. I've been through Hurricane Florence and some of the other flooding events that have happened over time. So I really wanted to get into this community and see what we could do. And pass-through funding came from North Carolina Sea Grant as well. They're wonderful. We selected North Carolina and did our pilot last year, so 2023. There's a really high risk here. Of course, we share state borders. And so it was nice for me to see in an entirely new state what it was like, who were already out there doing tidal monitoring efforts and figuring out what those partnerships were. I also interned with the North Carolina Coastal Federation during my college tenure, and so having them involved as well as POP was just a wonderful marriage of efforts. I did a kind of a statewide search for relevant community science efforts. We, of course, don't want to come into a new state or a new community dropping off a program and assuming that all is going to go well and that we're going to be the only ones doing it. And of course, we found other programs that were already doing some tidal monitoring work. So doing that pre-work and figuring out who's here, who's doing some volunteer work, who might already be involved in some of the research on tidal flooding, that's all super important when you're coming into a new community. We connected with that group, NC King Tides. This was run through Christine Voss, who was a professor at UNC. She has since retired, but helped me a ton with this program to figure out her volunteer network. I believe it's still kind of semi being run by UNC and NC State. They're the ones that produce that King Tide calendar. And so we kind of used their partnership and worked together to figure out how we could amplify our efforts with Catch the King as well as their King Tides program. We used two different tools during the pilot. Today we're going to talk really mostly about the sea level rise app, but just know there is another visualization app out there. So we were collecting water extent with our GPS pinpoint. So you go out during a flooded event and you kind of walk along the outer edges of water lines to delineate where that flooding is coming inland. And you can also take photos and write notes with our app. Coastal Observer is one that's taking, and specifically the North Carolina extension of the North Carolina King Tides project, they were taking water level measurements. So Coastal Observer is an app where you can just take photos of tidal flooding. But with the North Carolina pilot, they installed ruler gauges on various pilings and marinas and ends of docks that were in public areas. And their volunteers would go out during a King Tide event and actually take pictures of the water depth. So we're getting this kind of really beautiful complementary data set through this pilot of both the extent and the depth of the water. Again, the goals were to foster partnerships with people who were in both states to document flood depth and extent, building awareness of how sea level rise and flood risk can be engaged through the community and how we can collect data leveraging crowdsourced data collection. We can engage coastal residents in data collection and team building. Of course, can be a group project, but it can also be a solo adventure. I definitely recommend mapping with a buddy because you never know what's in floodwaters, but it's a really great way to get out. And then, of course, figuring out what we're going to do next. So we have all of this incredible King Tide data, but we have research in the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. Again, I said we have some local governments who utilize this data, but figuring out how else this data is useful, like tracking marine debris. Maybe there are areas that are frequently flooded at high tide that are bringing in significant amounts of debris. And so we can track those kinds of areas. But it's relatively a new exploratory space for us, is figuring out what more can we do with the data that we're collecting. So since June of 2023, we've established interest, of course, through all the outreach we've done. We published the King Tide calendar, met and trained a ton of awesome people, coordinated efforts during the King Tide season last August through November. So the King Tide season kind of runs through the end of summer through almost the end of the year. So October coming up is kind of our last big King Tide event of the year. We held a ton of events, both training events and actual volunteer data collection events with existing volunteer networks. Last year during our pilot, we collected almost 2,000 pins, 92 Coastal Observer photos in 6 different locations. And we are currently in discussion with NOAA to do another pilot expansion of this funding program, and of course continue to steward what we're doing in North Carolina. These are all of our partners down here. There's a ton. People get really interested in the King Tide work. Here are some results. So just showing you where we collected data. So Onslow County, Wrightsville Beach. I put these cards together to show both of the app efforts. So we've got some pictures of the sea level rise app pins here. This is not all of the pins that were collected in every region, but just to show you what that visualization looks like. And then some of the pictures collected by Coastal Observer, which King Tide this particular event had collected data for, and then some of the other impact on observations. So like I said, you can collect notes with the Sea Level Rise app. So we can collect things that say strong winds and surf. Maybe this was a tropical storm flooding event. And we had, of course, wonderful partners. Topsail Beach was a great one. Their local government got involved in data collection. This obviously looks pretty familiar. This is right down there by the bridge. And tons of Wrightsville Beach and Wilmington were, of course, our largest participation last year, because that's where kind of my home base was for this pilot expansion. But just to show you some of the things we collected. Carteret County as well. Bald Head Island, one of the interesting things that came out of the partnership with Bald Head Island was that they actually went to document whether the king tides were washing over sea turtle nests. So as that flooding comes high into the dunes here, those sea turtles like to nest pretty high up on the beach. Some are kind of in tune with how these tides come in, so they settle high enough on the beach where they don't get affected by those king tides. But again, as sea levels rise, and really all that's protecting homes and this kind of bayside ecosystem is those dunes. So as sea levels rise, there's really no beach space left for those turtles to settle and nest when those king tide events happen. So really kind of interesting research overlap. Wilmington, of course, I think this is Battleship again over here, and Carolina Beach, which of course is a huge one. So all of these pictures come from either our app or the Coastal Observer app from what people collected. If you want to see these again or figure out kind of more about what our North Carolina project is, you can go to wetlandswatch.org/catchthekingNC. So tack that NC on the bottom. If you take off the NC, you'll go to our main registration page for Virginia data collection. But of course, if you want to participate, I would check out the NC website and see some of the new resources we have there. Talking a little bit about data collection. So this is a zoomed in picture on Bald Head Island, again with the Sea Level Rise app documenting where that high tide line came in. But we can also look at kind of the temporal differences. So what are the differences between the different king tide events that we're monitoring for? So this was, I think the longest ago was August 2023. So this was a king tide event. And more recently, April 2024 for one of those tracking tides and trash events that we held with POP. I believe both of these, if not all three, were data from POP volunteers. And so we can kind of see what the differences in different king tides around the year look like. So these are some of the data things that we're studying. And then this was, Hurricane Franklin versus September 20. So just a month later, the king tide was a little bit lower, but we can see with the hurricane conditions or tropical storm conditions, that high tide line comes right up to the dunes, and that's why it's a little straighter up here too, because it's just hanging out right on that dune edge in Topsail. Someone asked a question about beach nourishment earlier. Well, one of the interesting things from a satellite view that we're studying is that it looks like maybe our volunteer walked out into the middle of the ocean to collect this data. But if you turn on the satellite view layer, you can see that there is some beach nourishment happening here. So be mindful when you're looking at maps of, or different colorations and layers of maps, that there may actually be land there. We may have put it there, but there is actually land there. So one of our volunteers has gone out, I believe this is the south end of Wrightsville Beach, if I'm not mistaken, all the way at the end. And so this is always where you see those beach nourishment boats out there, and so that's one of those critical areas. But it doesn't always have to be coastal, right? I know this is still kind of bayside coastal, but getting that data of how it's coming up through storm drains, affecting people's yards, maybe there are small creeks and inlets in your backyard that cause this kind of more localized flooding. These are also really important data collection. A lot of the projects, I just want to highlight some of our partners. We, of course, worked with UNCW. We are here at Cape Fear River Watch, so spreading the word has been wonderful. We've also worked with Waterkeepers to help spread the word. They have a station up in Beaufort, and we're planning on doing an event with an aquarium up there, so we might get that on the books sometime this year. North Carolina Coastal Federation, oh, I don't have POP on here. Oh, I'm so sorry. I swear, we work with POP. Sunny Day Flooding Project, North Carolina King Tides. North Carolina DEQ also gave us some interesting connections with folks out in the Carteret County and Outer Banks areas. If you're looking to get involved or want to dive deeper, we are going to have an optional app training still after this. So if you want to learn how to use the Sea Level Rise app, I will actually walk you through step by step how we collect data. But just to give you an overview, if you want to DIY this and do it yourself, we have an app FAQs website, so wetlandswatch.org/app FAQs. It'll teach you all about how to download it. There are tutorial guides on how we collect data and all of that. The app FAQs website is really a one-stop shop for all of these things. Training guides, videos, how to read a tide prediction chart. So it gives you links to NOAA's tidal station website, and you can click a tidal gauge near you and figure out what that timing is going to be. We have maps on here, interactive kind of volunteer maps that take you directly to flood locations, and then newsletter signups. We have a Catch the King newsletter. If you don't, well, I'll skip to that slide in a second. If you want to just receive information on what we're doing and when King Tide events are happening, I highly recommend signing up for our Catch the King newsletter. We drop information of all sorts, including complementary community science projects, links to our resources. We have an arts contest this year for Catch the King, which is really fun. And then again, we hold an appreciation event in the early next year. If you want to sign up for it now, feel free to scan this QR code. It will take you to wetlandswatch.org/catchtheking. And if you scroll down a little ways, you should see a subscribe for CTK news box. I actually think this may look a little different nowadays because we just launched a website update. But either way, when you go to this website or scan this QR code, look for a news subscription box. It might not look exactly like this now that I'm remembering our website has been updated. You'll get a confirmation email once you plug in your email for that, and you'll have to confirm that before you get your first email. We'll be sending out a ton between now and the October King Tide event.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you sharing this data with developers and town councils who are doing permitting? Because the problem really isn't the water.
Yeah.
The problem is the structures that are being built on marshland.
Yes.
And have been built for quite some time.
Yes.
So it's even, you know, and also with fishermen, because I mean, these marshes are where the baby shrimp and everything are.
Yep.
You know, it's a life thing.
Yeah.
So, are you sharing this data with developers and town councils? Because Oak Island just permitted a 4,000 square foot house.
No way.
Right at the very end of the island.
Oh
Yes.
my God. Yeah. We are, well, Wetlands Watch has a ton of different program areas where we are trying to engage real estate agents, developers, things like that about improving the awareness around flood risk. But no, Catch the King data, we haven't been able to share directly to those folks. We are just in such early stages of figuring out what the research looks like, and in many cases, this data is not of interest to them. They'll look at it and say, okay, and continue on. Not to say that it's not important, because that's absolutely a conversation we are trying to have, but the more awareness we get around it, the more kind of publicly accessible tools we make from it, the better those conversations are going to get. So not directly, but it is in mind to figure out what we can do. Thank you. So to bring up that King Tide calendar again, this resource is on those mapping websites, so Catch the King NC. This calendar will be linked on there, so if you've lost it or you didn't get a picture of it, feel free to hang out there. For king tide involvement and collecting data, we've developed a spreadsheet, which I have since transitioned to a map, but some people like a spreadsheet, some people like a map, so I've kept both resources up on the website. We went through and listed a ton of locations per locality that we've been engaging, not just the 6 that I mentioned earlier, but many along North Carolina's coast that experience tidal flooding. And these are specific street locations, so you can go to these streets and collect the data. In the past, I've added the peak high tide times for each of those locations on specific king tide dates. This is a little outdated, but we have since updated that with the upcoming October dates, so you can go in and see what time is going to flood at these locations. We are using, this is NOAA's tide prediction chart, so these are all the tidal gauges that NOAA operates. I believe the white ones aren't necessarily owned by NOAA, but they collect temporal data on high tide cycles. Maybe they're a USGS sensor, something like that. So you can actually come in and click on an individual one of these pins that's closest to you, and it will pull up a tide chart map that shows you where and when it's going to flood in that area. This is the interactive location map that we're using. So again, all of these are linked on that Catch the King North Carolina website. This is a Google Maps or powered by Google Maps. So if you go into this map and click on a red star, which we've identified as an area with flooding, you can actually get driving directions right to there. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for you to find those flooding locations, although many of you might already know where it floods. So you can always go out in the community wherever you already know. But this is just to support your data collection, and if you're looking for a direct place to go, these are some of the locations we've compiled. So what's next? If you want to get involved in the Catch the King monitoring work, you can go to wetlandswatch.org/catchthekingNC, review the tide calendar, so upcoming event October, I believe it's 15th through the 22nd. Is our next big king tide event with a super new moon mixed into it, or super full moon mixed into it. Looking for new locations, of course, and volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering and you don't want to kind of DIY it yourself, please feel free to reach out to me. My email will be up in a second, and I can help get you started or connected with something like a POP event when we do hybrid beach cleanups. Sign up for that Catch the King newsletter. It's a great way to get information. Yes, I was right. October 15th through the 22nd. That's our next upcoming king tide event. Mark your calendars too, even if you don't plan on collecting data, just know the community might be flooded at that time. So if you're planning on driving to Carolina Beach and hitting Canal Drive, you might want to take another road. So that's why the king tide calendar is also a great resource. Local governments, including Carolina Beach, will post that in like a city newsletter or a town newsletter so that both tourists and locals can know when those events are coming up. This is my email. I think I have a better version of it in a second, so I'll skip past that. But I'll open it up for Q&A while that contact information is up there. Thank you.